As many of you may be aware, Disney's Steamboat Willie has just become part of the public domain. Despite Disney's repeated efforts to change copyright laws in order to retain a hold on their properties, it appears what is arguably their most famous animation has been able to escape becoming public property. Created in 1928, the animation was a project of Walt Disney aimed at joining the community of animators who created the first cartoons with synchronized sound. Following test viewings with audiences, it was positively received, and since its release 96 years ago has become an instrumental part of the history of animation. While the impact of this animation is not to be understated, this channel primarily focuses on vehicles, so today we will be answering the question of what steamboat is actually used in Steamboat Willie. We begin this by looking at the 2-minute and 25-second mark, as this is the first time in the video that the entire boat is visible to the audience. With just one frame, we are given an extraordinary amount of information about the background of this vessel. One of the most important characteristics seen is the placement of the paddle wheels, which helps to narrow down the search significantly. This placement is important due to the design history of paddle wheel steamers, as there are multiple different forms that have come about across the world. As this is an American animation, we can take a quick look at the types of paddle wheels that have been used on the waterways of the United States. The paddle wheel steamer was a derivative of the steam-powered ship that gained popularity in the late 18th and the majority of the 19th century, becoming a predominant form of propulsion for ships until it was superseded by the propeller. The United States produced a significant amount of paddle wheels and was often at the spearfront of innovation with them in competition with Europe. In 1819, the United States would take a place in history for having the first steamship to cross the Atlantic Ocean with the SS Savannah. There were many different designs for paddle wheel steamers, with each being designed for the specific waterway in which they would primarily operate on. The waterways of the United States, just like the open ocean, each have their own characteristics that change the way one can navigate. For instance, the most famous of American paddle wheel designs is arguably those made for the Mississippi River, the iconic rectangular-shaped vessel with a massive circular paddle towards the rear. The reason for which this was designed is due to the relatively shallow nature of the river, and as such, they needed to have as little draft as possible. This design would be seen in other areas of the world, with some ships incorporating centrally covered paddle wheels that could be entirely concealed within the ship's superstructure. However, the most common type of paddle wheel was the side wheel, and as you can expect from the name, the design would place the paddles on either side of the ship's hull. Many side wheels were just continuations of regular sailing ships incorporating the same hull designs and rigging. However, many others, mostly in the mid to latter half of the 19th century, would have designs that would start evolving to look like what we would know steamships to be in the 20th century and modern times. With this history, it can now be seen as to why the placement of the paddles gives us a vast amount of information towards the identity of Mickey's steamboat. With it being a side-wheel steamer, this immediately takes out the possibility of it being based on a Mississippi River steamer. This leads us to look at the next important characteristic, the hull shape. While the paddle wheels are missing their coverings, their placement and the curvature of the hull is very similar to the paddle steamers of the Hudson River. One ship in particular that appears similar to the steamboat, albeit with only one funnel, is the steamer JMA, which unfortunately does not appear to have much information as to its history. However, anyone that has spent a good amount of time near a harbor would immediately recognize what the identity of the steamboat most likely is: a tugboat. The general characteristics of a tugboat are nearly an exact match for Mickey's boat: a relatively short-length hull that curves upwards towards the bow. While not exact matches, there are in fact two paddle wheel tugboats still in existence that are very similar: the Dumpleton hull and the P.S. John H. Amos, and one that no longer exists named the Norwich. When looking at the Dumpleton hull and John H. Amos, they both have the forward wheelhouse situated on top of the superstructure and curved hull, although not as cartoonishly as in the animation, similar to the steamboat. The only major differences are the number of funnels and that they do not have aft mast cranes. However, Dumpleton Hall did at one point have 2 masts in her life. With this, it can be argued that Mickey's Steamboat is a paddle wheel steam tug similar but not entirely based on a Tyne-style tug, with these types being active from the first built in 1814 to the mid-20th century. This would put it in a family of tugboats with significant historical value, as it can be argued that the River Tyne was the birthplace of tugboats with the advent of the steam tug in the early to mid-19th century. The 2 extant examples are the only remaining examples of this history, with Dumpleton Hall also having one of the, if not only, remaining marine-mounted grasshopper-type steam engines. Unfortunately, John H. Amos has not had a positive life, as in the 90s she was holed under the waterline and sank to her moorings. She is now mounted atop a barge outside of London in an area named St. Mary's Island. While she is in a poor state, it does give the opportunity to see the entirety of the ship due to the hull being out of the water. As for the Dumpleton Hall, she has been lucky enough to escape a watery fate and remains afloat at the San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park. Unfortunately, she is no longer open to public boarding. Hopefully you have enjoyed this rare chance to consider a Disney property without the fear of receiving a cease and desist letter in the mail.